Hello my fellow developer. You are now on your way to becoming the master game developer or on your way to create the biggest company in the entire world. Previously we covered how to install Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition, and that is required for this tutorial as well. So now let's get rid of that one. There, we shot a fart at it. Now this time we are going to have a look at symbol types, value types and variables. They are key to everything. It is like you cannot read a book or write a book if you don't know the alphabet. Symbol types, value types and variables are the alphabet of C#. You need to learn them. The video is quite long, so I understand if you save it for later and watch it in bits as you need them. That is completely fine. You can always return to the video. As it's a long video, let's get started. Value types are types that can contain a value. It could be a structure type or a enumeration type. That is what Microsoft would want to teach you, but I would say that it's most likely too complex for the vast majority of new developers. So let's boil it down to what it really is. A value type that is built-in value type is also known as a simple type. A simple type can only contain a single value. That is a much better way of actually remembering it. Now with that in mind, then I have included string. String is not a simple type, but I have included it anyway, as the vast majority of people think it is a simple type, but it is not. I will explain further when we get to string. All the other types we go through in this video are simple types. So built-in value types that can only contain a single value. Let's start by creating a new solution in Visual Studio 2022 Community Edition. Click Create New Solution. You want a console application, click Next. Call it How to Program C# 01 because this is episode 01. Click Next. Do not support top level statements and create. There, now we have our new solution. The char represents a single Unicode UTF-16 character, in short pretty much any type of character, symbol, etc. you can write on your keyboard. You define a char by writing char, space, name equal, and then the value. Before you call me the worst teacher in the world, like my wife and daughter calls me, let's have a look at what UTF-16 actually is. So here we have all the UTF-16 characters. Isn't that nice? It makes a lot of sense, right? Well, not really, at least not until you zoom in. As you can see, there are quite a few, but to top it up, there's also something called UTF-32 with even more characters. But we will just keep a focus on UTF-16 for now. Now back to the example. A char is always wrapped in a single quote. You have to start with and end with a single quote. A string is a series of chars. We will have a look at string next, even though it's not actually a simple type. Now let's write the char value to console and run the application. Here we see the char value is set to A. So perfect, it works. Let's have a look at a string. A string is not a symbol type, it is a sequence of char values. That means a string actually contains multiple values, which makes it a non-simple type. All strings are surrounded by double quotes, as you can see here in console.writeLine. Double quote, a string is not a simple type, but a sequence of char values, double quote. Now let's define our first string. Here we have a string that is called important and that contains the value I love cake. Now let's create a new string. Here we have a new string called super important. Subscribe, like and share my videos please. Smiley face, a stupid smiley face though, but nonetheless a smiley face. So now we have two strings, and if you want to write them out, you can simply do a console write line important and console.writeLine super important. Now let's try and run the application. Here we see I love cake and subscribe, like, share my videos. Please, stupid smiley face. That is nice. So let's actually try and combine the two strings. So how can we combine or build upon a string? Well, the easiest way is to create a new string. Final message equals, and you have your important plus, and then you create a space string, so a string only containing a space, plus super important. And if we remove these two and go here and write a new one, console write line final message, we will see that they should both be on the same line, which they are. Another way of doing the exact same here would be, let's just set the value again to use a $sign, double quote, and semicolon. And in here, you can actually use your variables now. In this case, the two different strings. So we have the important, space, curly bracket, super important. So now we have set the final message in another way. We have $sign, double quote, curly bracket start, important space, super important, curly bracket end, double quote end. Let's try and run it. So we can remove this here by doing this instead, and we run it. And you can even write normal text inside here, like I really do. The bool represents a boolean value that can be true or false. Bool is cake equals false. Bool is horse equals true. Those are the two values it can have. Here we demonstrate how a bool works using an if statement. Bool has spoon equals false. In case that it is false, it should write Neo does not have the spoon. Here we see that the value is false and Neo does not have the spoon. Now let's change the value to true and run it again. Press F5 and it will run. Here we see that the bool value is true and Neo has the spoon. A boolean that can be true or false is also known as a two-way boolean because it only has two possibilities. The default value for a bool is false. Now let's have a look at a three-way boolean where the boolean is nullable. In this case you write a question mark after bool, and then you can write is cake equal true and is horse equal false, or you can actually set it to null. The default value of a nullable int is not false, unlike the normal bool, it is null. That means if you create a new nullable bool and do not set it to equal anything, it will simply be null. In this example, we need to check for has spoon is actually set to true or false, as it has the possibility of being null, and in the case it's null, it goes down into the last else statement. And as we can see here, the value is, and then followed by nothing, because it doesn't have any value, and the text, there is no spoon. Unlike the normal bool, you actually have to check for the value true or false when using nullable bools. There are 10 integral numeric types, meaning integral as in they do not support decimal separators. The types are sbyte, byte, short, ushort, int, uint, long, ulong, nint, and nuint. As this is a beginner tutorial and as it's very unlikely that you'll have any need for most of them, we will only be focusing on int and long. The rest will come in an advanced tutorial at a later point. We can get the minimum and maximum value of an integer and a long by simply writing the type.minValue, type.maxValue. Now let's run the application and see the difference between the two types. Here we can see the minimum and maximum for integers and long. So if you are using extremely large numbers, use long. If not, use int. Let's have a look at some basic math examples with integer, but you could as easily have used long if you wish. Let's quickly run the application and have a look at the result. Basic addition. You say int addition equals 1 plus 1 and the result is 2. You can also add two variables together. So we'll see int first and second number addition result equals first plus second number equals 6. Subtraction is written in the exact same way, just with a minus. So int subtraction equals 1 minus 1. Subtraction value is 0. In case you have the values in two variables, you write int first and second number subtraction result equals first number minus second number. First number subtracted second number gives minus 2. For multiplication, we write an asterisk instead of a minus or a plus. I know many people call it a star, but it is called an asterisk. Int multiplication equals 2 asterisk 2. Multiplication value is 4. For division, you simply say int division equals 6 slash 2. And again, in many cases, you'll hear people say 6 divided by 2, but it is actually a slash. Division value is 3. When you divide two numbers by each other, you'll often see that you should get a decimal number back or something with a comma separator. But that is not always the case. If you expect a result back in an integer or long, that is what you'll get. And in this case here, we have int division rounded down 200 divided by 3. Division with int will always round down. Value is 66, but should be 66.66666. And if correct math, nearest fullest integer is actually 67. So there we will need to use a math method to get it to always round up. However, that is something we will save for a more advanced video with math. And again, if you have your values in two variables, you can simply write int first and second number division result equals second number divided by or slash first number, and you will get the result of 2. Float point numeric represents real numbers with decimal separators, aka the fractional part in a number, which depends on your PC/server culture settings. As with integer and long, we can use min value, max value to get the minimum value and the maximum value. So let's have a look at those first. Let's run the application and move the window so we can see both. Here we can see the different minimum and max values depending on float, double or decimal. And if you look at float and double, and that is actually also true for decimal, but it doesn't display here, then they support weird numbers. E plus 38, that is actually a scientific number, or scientific notation if you will. How to calculate that or convert it into a normal number would be to say 3.4, and E38 is actually 10 uplifted 38 times. As I was saying, 3.4 times 10 uplifted 38 times. As can be seen here, I've written the precision of the different types, where float has a precision of 6 to 9 digits, double 15 to 17, and decimal 28 to 29 digits. That may seem a little bit funky to you, as you have no idea what that means, but what it actually means is at some point it will round funky and give you a wrong result, so don't depend on all the decimals to be accurate. It's usually the last decimal that goes wonky when you go above the precision. Unfortunately, that is not the only thing funky when using these types. You'll also notice that the decimal separator is sometimes a dot and sometimes a comma. As I have the Danish culture, we use comma as the decimal separator here, or fractional separator if you want. To change the fractional separator from comma to a dot, we have to set the culture. I know I wrote to get the comma, but that is not what I meant. It's in reverse. Then you have to set the culture. And you do that by saying thread.current culture equals system.globalization.culture.info.invariant culture. I highly recommend that you always set the culture to invariant culture and then specify the output to the culture you want whenever you have an output. The reason for that is you don't want to crash a plane, or you don't want to create an XCOM shooter game where you miss all the 99% chances of hit. Also, when creating APIs and you return a decimal, for example, and it has a comma separator instead of a dot separator, the value will be very different when received by another API or another application. And in case you are actually coding something that is quite important, like a navigation system for an airplane, etc., you could crash everything. So remember to always set the culture. As with int and norm, you can use plus, minus, asterisk, and slash for basic math. The above is an example of ints divided. You would expect the result to be 66.666 if it's rounded down. However, as you are using two ints, the results will be an int, and using int logic rounding and then convert it to a float. So division rounded down int result is 66. The correct way of doing it is to postfix it with an f. So float division rounded down from float equals 200f divided by 3f. F defines that this is actually a float number. For double, use an uppercase D, and for decimal, use a lowercase m. Division rounded down float result is 66.66664, which, if using correct math rounding, you would actually have 66.666667 or 66.6 forever. But as the precision is quite low, it will round it weirdly at the very end, and that is why precision is quite important. If you don't need something that is super precise, use float to save memory. It's a good practice to always use the lowest one you need. If you really need something that is super precise, then use decimal. But for the vast majority of applications, and that includes games, float is perfectly fine. Variables, explicitly typed and implicitly typed. Explicitly typed is the one we have used so far, where we define the type, then the name, then equals, and then the value. So in this case, int x equals 10. 10 is an integer, and we have defined x as an integer. Implicit typed is where we don't define the type. The type is inherited by the value. In this case, 10 is an integer, therefore var must be an integer. You can mouse over and then you can see that it tells you that the structure is integer 32-bit. Many developers would warn you against using implicitly typed, but I actually prefer it, and here is a very good example of it. So here we have an example of why I prefer it. We have value 1, it is a float, and we have value 2, it is a float, and the result, of course, is a float, because we have two floats added together. Now, if you had explicitly typed, you would have to change this to a float, this to a float, and this to a float, to a float. If you're using float, you would have to do like this, which is perfectly fine, of course, but then let's say that tomorrow you figure out that, oh no, it's not precise enough, I would actually need to use decimals, and you have used these values 800 places in I don't know how many methods, then you would need to go around and refactor everything. However, if you are using implicit types, you just change the values. So in this case, I change them to m, and I set the value. And now this is actually a decimal. So imagine that you have been using this so many different places, and you only have one point of entry where you used to come with a float, and now it's a decimal, and everything has changed. I know as a new developer, it's most likely best for you to use explicitly typed, because it will actually force you to think about it. But down the road, I highly recommend that you change over to use implicitly typed instead. It is much easier and much faster. Here we have a quick view of the terminology that you would need to learn. I have tried to include some of the secondary names so you don't get confused. That was all for this time. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you learned something. Of course, it is a pretty long video and there's a lot of information, so you can always rewatch parts of it using the chapters. If you like my video, please click like. If you didn't, please click dislike. And if you want to help me out, please subscribe and share it. It actually helps me out a lot. Let me know in the comments what you think about the style. Is it too fast, too slow, too much info or too little? And that is all for this time. See you in the next one.